Hi all, welcome back to another episode of What Is This Weapon? I'm Christian, and today I've got for you this big beastie in front of me here. This is a ZB-53 made in Czechoslovakia, specifically in Brno, same place that gave us such iconic weapons as the ZB-26, which later turned into the Bren. This was actually a weapon that was adopted by the Czechoslovak army in the 1930s as the Vzor 37. But that was as a ground tripod-mounted infantry machine gun, basically to replace water-cooled weaponry such as the Maxim, or as we would use in Britain, the Vickers. So as an air-cooled weapon, it's got a big heavy barrel. You can see some fluting here, which gives it a lot of steel and a lot of surface area to help cool down the barrel. But it is, well, as we'll see later on, it's actually bit more familiar to you perhaps than you might realize. But that's the Czechoslovak origins of this thing. Why is it here in the armouries? Well, Britain was quite interested in an air-cooled weapon for potentially both infantry and tank usage at the start of the 1930s. Until this point, the Vickers Mark IV A and B was the standard British tank infantry weapon, or armoured fighting vehicle weapon, sorry, machine gun in .303 caliber, as most British Vickers were. And, well, that's all well and good, but sometimes you need something that doesn't take a lot of water to use, for example, if you're out in the desert, maybe. And so the search began in 1931, and the War Office, or specifically the Small Arms Committee, issued a list of preferences for what they wanted in this potentially multi-use weapon. So, of course, it has to be air-cooled, but they also wanted it to use a similar gas piston system to the Bren, or ZGB as it was known at this time, because it was still in development for British .303 cartridges. They wanted it, strangely, to use a belt feed system similar to the Darn machine gun, which is a French design, which has the feed block in between the gas cylinder and the barrel, sort of here. Have a photo for you on screen so you can visualize that if you're not familiar. So that was an interesting specific request. They wanted a tilting block locking system, and they wanted it to use a ZGB style extractor, along with a couple of smaller requests as well. And so initially they actually started looking at new Vickers designs as well. An air-cooled Vickers was tested, and ultimately they just couldn't make the thing work. It was also considered to maybe use the ZGB itself for this purpose, but that would need a bit of an extensive redesign for things like the barrel, where it's quite light profile and it needs a bit more sustained fire. And then in 1934, a pamphlet was sent to important people within the Small Arms Committee, which introduced this, one of Brno's new machine guns. Now, it took a little while to get things rolling. They wanted to demonstrate this as early as 1934, early 1935, but the Czechoslovak military objected to this because they were still testing it at that time, so it was somewhat still an in-progress weapon. But eventually it was presented here in the UK at the Royal Small Arms Factory at Enfield, and it was in its original 792 Mauser guise. It was, after all, that's the service cartridge of the Czechoslovak military, as well as so many militaries across Europe at this time. It would be silly for the Czechs not to tap into that potential market there. Naturally, the British authorities were impressed, and again, when I take this thing apart later on, we'll see just why this actually meets up so many of those preferences that the Small Arms Committee wanted in 1931. So what makes this one so special? Well, the British military was impressed, but there was one niggling little problem, and it is that 792 Mauser cartridge, because Britain was putting a lot of well, money and direction into Brno to turn their ZB-26 machine gun into one that can shoot .303 British, the standard British service cartridge, which was used in both rifles and machine guns. And it wouldn't make sense to put all that effort in to have one gun for the infantry to use, one in every section, and then have another machine gun in a completely different caliber, especially one which Britain wasn't using at all at this time. And so the request was made, or specifically it was asked of the Czechs, would you be able to feasibly convert this to shoot .303? The answer was an enthusiastic yes. In fact, they thought that the cordite in British cartridges might even work better than the 792 Mauser stuff. And so a request was made by British authorities to purchase one of these in 303. And a pilot model was made up, and it was demonstrated in Britain in early 1937. And the results were good. It was very promising. And in fact, in 1935, it was already looking so promising that two of these were outright purchased. This one here, which is in 303 British, which is why it's so unusual, this was bought for £392, and the other one was actually set up for ground use off of a tripod. That one cost £880, presumably because of the cost of the tripod and other accessories to go with it. So this is where this gun itself comes in. It was delivered in October of 1937 under contract G569, and it is one of two existing, as far as we know today, 303 caliber ZB-53 machine guns. And of course, this would then be developed into the Besa that we all know and love. So, with that said, I think it's time to have a look inside this thing and really see what's going on here. After all, it's an interesting gun that doesn't really get as much attention, I think, as it deserves. So being an interwar Czech design, this is actually pretty well designed in terms of taking it apart. And it's easier than it may seem when you first look at this thing. Now, first thing we have to do is actually cock it, and this is one of the most iconic things about the ZB-53 and the Besa, is that the cocking handle is the pistol grip, and this also was reused on the Besa or Faulkner light machine gun that was also used or developed and made at Besa, who made the Besa. So we have a spring catch here at the back. We can just use that once we take the safety off, a feature that Britain wanted removed, so that you can cock it with the safety on. Grip goes forwards, and then this one's a bit stiff. It comes back, and now it's cocked. From here, we can open up the top. We'll see all the goodies inside later, but the next step here is to remove the barrel. Again, a fairly easy procedure. So we have a spring catch here. We just lift this lever up, bring it forward to unlock, bring the action forward with it, and we can just pivot it up. I can bring the top cover back down and hinge this out the front, which on this mount is a little tricky sometimes. And there's our big heavy barrel with a gas block underneath. So you can see, and you can probably hear it in my voice, there's a lot of weight here. This is why this is able to work as an air-cooled gun. There's a lot of metal here, especially compared to the likes of a barrel used on, say, the Vickers. So with that off, the top cover just pivots off, nice and simple. And now we can see inside this thing. I'll just take out the accelerator now. So this has two rates of fire, one higher, one lower, naturally. This is the accelerator that does it. And all this does is pivot in and out of the way of the path of the bolt to either shorten the length of travel, which increases the rate of fire, or to lengthen it, which reduces rate of fire. A very elegant and simple solution. It's just a block. Very nice. Next, we can take the feed block off. First, we take off the belt guide. And so this guides the belt as it comes out of the action. And then the rest of the feed block just comes off. And lastly, we have the barrel extension and the piston group and the mainspring. At this point, we have to decock it, which we can do without dry firing. If we press the spring catch up whilst holding the barrel extension down, the manuals say this, it's quite important, otherwise it could pivot up and cause all sorts of mayhem. Bring back, catch up, and just let it down gently. We can also, at this point, remove the pistol grip. So we've got a catch here, bring that out, back, trigger down, and off it comes. Quite a refined piece of kit as well. Now the mainspring, so push it in from the back. It's quite strong, but pivots up and out. Nice and easy. So we've got a nice long coil spring here with a block to seat it in at the rear of the action. And then the barrel extension with the breech block and the piston just lifts out. So we can take these apart, slide the barrel extension forwards, off of the piston. This is covered in preservative grease, so it is a bit tacky. And here is our piston and breech block assembly. And one last thing is the feed block pawl, if you like. And so this has a stud here which runs in a groove on the underside of the piston, which then moves this side to side to run the feed block. And it really is that simple. So with that done, I'm now going to put this back together. It's just the reverse of what we've just done. And we'll look at where you might have seen some of this before. So I was saying earlier about why you might recognize this design a bit more than you think. And this is really at the core of it, and some of you may already be seeing exactly what I'm talking about. So this is the piston assembly out of our ZB-53, and it is, as was requested in 1931 by the War Office, a tilting breech block, Bren-style gas piston system. In fact, this is basically a Bren action. And I can show you that with a Bren action. So if I show you here on the overhead, these are basically the same thing. Tilting block, tilting upwards at the rear. This one's very sticky. And then here's the Bren doing exactly the same thing. There's only some slight changes in terms of the style, but ultimately it's basically the same action. And this is, not to rag on ZB, they did a very good job with this, but it does seem that in the 1920s and 30s they took this one, frankly, excellent gun design and they just ran with it and they just reused it wherever they could. Another example would be the ZH-29 rifle, which is very similar again, just tilted onto its side. So we have a gun here in 303. The question now is, why didn't we adopt it in 303? After all, anyone who knows the Besa knows that it quite famously uses the 7.92x57 Mauser cartridge and was the only British military service weapon of the Second World War to use that. So you've now got to establish an entire new supply line of ammunition production and also supply to feed those guns which only have one use in tanks. Well, it's not for want of trying. These actually did very well in their acceptance testing, which took place in November 1937. Both of the Besas, or ZB-53s in 303, were considered to have passed. They fired between them just over 800 rounds, and there were only 4 stoppages, 2 from misfeeds, and 2 suspected to be cartridges bouncing up into the action after ejection. So they actually come out the bottom here like on the Bren. But actually, the reality is that the 2 of these guns that did arrive were dead on arrival, basically. The month before these arrived, so in September 1937, a decision was made at the Small Arms Committee. And in fact, I do have a quote here from those minutes to really explain what happened. The representative of DSD at the meeting expressed for the General Staff the decision that Mauser rimless ammunition would be acceptable for use in the ZB-53 gun, provided it functioned satisfactorily. He stated that urgency was the foremost consideration and that the gun, 303-inch or Mauser type, which would be ready for service appreciably the earlier, must be the one decided upon. And as a result of that, this project was basically dumped. Why would you continue working on a 303 gun when you've only got 2 examples made as one-offs, when the 7.92 ones are already being made in quantity for another country's military? And then, of course, at this point as well, BSA were already well on their way to tooling up to make the gun, again in its original caliber. So ultimately, it came down to time. As early as the end of 1937, the writing was on the wall for the British military. If they hadn't adopted it by then, that was it. They had to get something in now, and the 7.92 version was ready. And that is why, unfortunately, this interesting little piece of British military history just didn't go anywhere. In fact, as early as within a year or 2 after these were even bought, they were already being referred to by their custodians as museum pieces, which is quite sad given how basically they were brand new. But that's of course not the end of the story. We all know where the Besa went from there. It was Britain's primary tank machine gun, rifle caliber, used in famous British tanks, so the Cromwell, the Churchill, British designed and built tanks tended to have these, and they served well throughout the Second World War and even beyond. Well, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you learnt something new and found this at least somewhat interesting. Do, of course, check out our What Is This Weapon Live coming up on Saturday the 11th of March. Jonathan will be doing a live presentation, and of course there will be tickets available for that. We have a variety of different things going on that day. You can even do a meet and greet with him if you like. Otherwise, do please like and subscribe to this video. It really helps us out, helps spread the message, spread the love of arms and armour. And of course, the Royal Armouries is a charity as a museum, so do, if you feel like you are able to donate and want to and support what we're doing here, do please feel free to do so. Information for that is in the description below. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.